Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this is an episode of Farther Down the Rabbit Hole, and we're streaming to you today from rabbitholecentral.tv. We've been having a little bit of difficulty with the stream. I was in blissful ignorance yesterday, but I still highly encourage any of you who just tune into the stream to check it out on youtube.com/Paula Gloria. Eventually, I'm going to get this better organized on my website, paulagloria.com. But to this date, I've given priority on my website, paulagloria.com, to the unmet needs department, because expressions of anger, frustration, despair are all tragic expressions of unmet needs. And if we can address those unmet needs, we're going to see that the expressions in human beings of needs that are going to be met are going to indeed be ones of love, abundance, of joy, and we're going to be able to interact in a better way. One of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had working in public access television happened last Sunday at Pete's Cafe on Irving Place. That's on 18th and Irving. And this is a location that's famous for O. Henry having written stories there. And at the time O. Henry wrote his stories at Pete's Cafe, he probably could have been a member of the Players Club, which was a club that was more or less formed for the artists. It was really formed by Edwin Booth, who's the brother of John Wilkes Booth, whose claim to fame, whose notoriety was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Now, after this club was formed, over the years, it became something that was more the playground of the elite, more the patrons of the arts rather than the artists themselves. And so when you had an actual artist, a writer like O. Henry, he actually felt more comfortable to be in the cafe. And I think Gurdjieff also used to do his writings in cafes. He liked to be surrounded by that kind of hustle and bustle. So there's a little bit of a taste of it up on YouTube right now, which is the meeting of 9/11 shaman, who turns out has quite a very fascinating history at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and Victor Taplin, who's the executive producer of Rabbit Hole Central. He, 9/11 shaman, in a fit of emotion, had marshaled all his creativity into an extraordinarily nasty comment, and one of my viewers said it would have made David Mamet blush. So I put it on my unmet nastiest comment of the day, and I also said as a caveat to parents to not block my site because of this, because after all, the kids know and the kids understand. And what's more important is to spend time with your children so that you can I don't want to say train, because train sounds like you're training a dog, and you don't want nonviolent communication to be kind of a robotic, repetitive thing, but to guide your children, to support your children, so that they have the fortitude and the capacity to look beyond the anger, the frustration, the despair, and listen and find what is the unmet need that's not being addressed. So the reason this was so very heartening to me was it was a vindication to what some people have been leveling against me, because there was actually some association with Marshall Rosenberg having a Jewish name, saying, oh, this means that Paula is working for the Zionists. Paula is in with the new and the bad media, the seemingly new media, that's still going to regurgitate the same old message of domination and support for Israel, so that we're giving them tons and tons of money. And no, I'm always going to walk my talk, and I'm going to speak in a forthright way. Let's take a look at Israel. But at the same time, I'm very concerned about people like Ralph Schoenman, and I've brought this to the attention of Josh Walensky. And again, it's always wonderful if you have somebody who's older and wiser, who's had experience, to sort of say, hey, when you were this age and it was this date, what exactly was going on? My feeling is that the secrets and the mysteries of longevity that have been promoted in literature of the Theosophical Society and so on is no more than really being courageous to rise above the social consensus in that moment, and that if people could do that, you would find that the older people would have valuable information that the younger people would be so happy to be able to be around and to absorb. So if the older people could be courageous, and this courage has to be cultivated from a younger age, to speak out when you feel hypocrisy is happening in the moment. So if that happens, you will see that you're going to have a greater connection of the generations, and certainly you're going to have a greater connection between the races, because you're going to see that a younger person is going to have a different viewpoint than an older person. We all know that younger people really take to the internet, better than older people do. But at the same time, this could be the answer to a prayer of older people who've wanted the means to be able to communicate like you can on the internet. But at the same time, I think it's very alarming that if we don't lose it, we're going to lose it. And so, again, what happened at Pete's was you could see somebody of Puerto Rican and Italian descent connecting with somebody of African descent, and that the connection was profound, as the consideration was that of public access television. And what does it mean to have a message that's unencumbered by special interests? Ugly George chimed in and he said that Calvin Klein was able to run a commercial of Brooke Shields as a little girl. And anybody else, if that was done on public access television, that would have been called pedophilia. And I don't think that John Gulino was able to express to the depth that I hope he can in the future about what goes on in the rock forums, but he felt that they were sites for pedophilia entrapments. So again, on the nasty comment of the day, I said to parents, do not block my site, but actually support your children, because what I'm trying to do is weather through very nasty comments until you can connect to the unmet needs. And if you do that, that is like the greatest inoculation that you can give to your child against pedophiles, because obviously pedophiles have had a past where they weren't being met, and they would have to resort to the methods that they use to be able to lure children in, so that children eventually will betray their parents and not tell them things that they will become ashamed about. And by holding a child in bondage in this way, that means later on in his life, you can put him into a position where he's also going to keep secrets about other things, and secrets that is not in the interest of society for them to hold. So that's why the connection between parents and children is very, very precious. But like all things that are precious, you really have to stand your ground and be able to weather through that which is not precious, or that which is sordid, and all the labels that you want to throw on, in order to ensure that that which is sacred is protected. So I'm hoping that we're going to be having a call-in actually from John Gulino himself, because he sent me a very important email. And again, he has this history of being a plane hugger, of thinking we were the bad guys down at Ground Zero, and just through his art and wanting to be a real YouTuber, really, I don't want to say exploit, but use the medium to its highest. Connect with people through videos, and he did theater performance and so on. And he started to dress up as me and some of the people that I work with, and the result was hilarious. So, whoops! Oh, I wonder, it didn't work. So try again, because sometimes. Oh, you're gonna have to turn down your Rabbit Hole Central. It's always nice to hear that, because I know people are watching me and the stream is working.
Yes. Hi, Paula.
Hey, how are you?
Hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, and I wanted to talk about what you sent to me. Maybe you can discuss it while I pull that up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the Daily News is running a story about the John Gotti Jr. being arrested, indicted on murder charges, 3 murder charges. And an interesting little note in the article says that one of the mobsters who was murdered had been awarded a $1.7 million contract back in the late 80s to fireproof the steel supports of the Twin Towers.
Right.
And it just kind of, if people are wondering if 9/11 was an inside job, I mean, here's a small step toward proving that that's the case, because apparently they had, the mafia was involved in the construction and maintenance of the World Trade Towers. And one of the biggest controversies about the collapse of the towers themselves was the steel supports, the steel columns, which they said were supposed to be fireproofed.
Right.
So here's something that kind of lends credence to this theory that 9/11 was an inside job.
Now, John, how do you feel, being that you're of Sicilian descent, when you hear these allegations about the mafia and so on?
Well, ironically, the Gambinos were, well, John Gotti is not actually of Sicilian descent, but he was sort of the young Turk that took over what was predominantly a Sicilian clan.
Right, but there's a lot of association with Sicily and the mafia.
Yes, and, I mean, well, the mafia is in control of the construction companies that build the buildings all over New York City and in the other 5 boroughs, including Connecticut. They're all over the place. They pretty much, that's their claim to fame, is building New York towers. And it just, when you realize now that we have organized crime involved in these constructions, it's obvious to see why there's shoddy work being done.
Well, now, I have a different opinion than you do on that, and I'm really reveling in the fact that, we've overcome a lot of hurdles so we can stay connected to kind of develop a better understanding, like a group of scientists are going to be better than just one.
Yes.
As long as they're faithful to what's really happening and not having an agenda in the back.
Yes.
So my concern is, a lot of times racism will make you jump to certain conclusions that you don't bother to do critical work. And it's so easy to start to pick out people to blame, and it's harder to stay in connection and go for the more difficult answer, instead of grabbing what's very quick.
Yes.
So my concern now is, I can see that I'm always saying the importance of understanding clearly how the World Trade Center came down is so that you don't blame the wrong person. Not that blame is ever going to be a solution anyway, but that's another issue. So you don't want to pin the blame on the wrong people. And there's 2 areas where society goes into knee-jerk reaction. And one is, the Jews did it, whether people will acknowledge this or not, and I have Jewish friends that are very concerned. I mean, right here on this bed, 2 of my Jewish girlfriends were saying, I'm really afraid because of what's going on, what they see brewing. They see the 9/11 truth movement as something that is fomenting anti-Semitism. And now you're bringing up the mafia issue. So now you've got the Italian thing running, and certainly in the past there has been a lot of prejudice towards Italians, and you can see somebody in power can easily pin the blame of something maybe the person in power did. Maybe it had nothing to do with these minorities, but they become useful because there is this prejudice that's running in society, so they sort of tag on to that. So what I'm going to say now regarding my research, well, first of all, what we had at Pete's with you and Victor, you were sort of outlining your history on YouTube vis-a-vis the postings I was doing. You said that you thought we were the bad guys because you heard about the arrests at 9/11 and so on. And after a while it got boring hanging out with the plane huggers, so you switched to the no planers.
Yes.
But if there were no planes that went in, I'm just saying if, I'm not trying to pin you down, because I want you and others to be able to mostly keep an open mind and realize the most important thing is not storming off in anger. So I'm saying if there were no planes, then where would the heat have come to expose steel without fireproofing, or really with or without, to fire so that the steel would have melted? Where would such heat come from?
Well, it would have to originate from the holes in the towers.
Okay, and And
that seems to be the big contention because, but then again, there were fires all the way at the bottom, at the belly of the towers, and then you had fires going on basically all throughout the entire building. I mean, the entire building was on fire, but we saw a lot of the fire at the very top. We didn't see the fires actually inside in the lower floors. So when you're thinking about fireproofing steel columns, and the mafia is notorious for doing really bad work.
But John, just a second. Why would steel need to be fireproofed? Steel doesn't melt. Fireproofing is for regular fires.
I don't think the steel was as strong as they say. I think the big cover-up about the World Trade Centers was that I think it was just an inferior structure, and I think the metal itself was not pure. It was not pure metal. They found you mentioned the dustification of the metal. Immediately, a light bulb turned in my head because I remember seeing something about the analysis of the metal within the towers. The steel itself was mixed with a kind of grain, some type of I don't know if they called it slate or I forgot the word, but it was some type of material that just compromised its strength and I think by about a quarter. So I think the towers themselves were weak, and they were primed for this type of destruction.
So what do you think was in the hole? Because when you look at the hole from the NIST report, you don't see an airplane.
Right, you don't see the airplane because, well, that's the irony of it, is when you look at the Pentagon, when the Pentagon was hit, and you follow the trajectory of whatever hit the Pentagon, you see what looks like a large, round, perfectly round hole.
No, actually, can we not talk about the Pentagon, but just stick on
I'm trying to make an example about how...
Yeah, but it really distracts.
But what I'm trying to say is whatever hit the towers went from one end to the other end. And
do you believe that?
I have a reason to suspect something like that would have to be like a missile of some kind. Something solid, unlike a plane, which is not solid, it's hollow.
But do you think if there was reinforcing on the steel that it could have withstood a missile if that was the case?
No way. Those towers were primed to fall because like I said, I think the steel itself was just like a cheap metal. I think they used probably the cheapest materials possible and tried to cut corners. And they were not as indestructible as they said they were. So to create a large explosion was enough to just, it's like a chandelier. To me, those were glass towers. They were made with steel, but to me, they were just glass towers.
So you're a missile hugger?
I wouldn't say a missile hugger, just something solid went from one end and the nose came out the other end. And that's what I meant about the Pentagon. That whatever made that large hole, that perfectly round hole, had to be a solid object, like a missile. So when you see that nose out at the other end of the tower, I mean, think about it. If the first so-called, assuming there was a plane, it disintegrated. There was nothing there to say, hey, this was a plane, because there was nothing left of it. So how is it possible? And they always show you these computer graphics that sort of reenact how the plane disintegrated through the tower. And it makes no sense, because if it could go through multiple concrete barriers of the Pentagon and create the kind of damage it did, it makes no sense that an airplane could do the same thing to the World Trade Towers, because that was an aluminum-based airplane. They don't use steel.
So I'm going to put your 9/11 shaman up there in the back. So where do you stand right now? How do you think it came down? The towers came down.
Well, whatever caused that large hole, I think compromised its strength in some way. But there's also, remember, you have to understand that the first bombing that took place in 93, between 93 and 2001, they had plenty of time to rig the building. They had plenty of time to plant bombs. They had plenty of time to compromise the core columns at the bottom. Remember when the towers came down, those core columns looked like they were perfectly cut. And to me, that has to be some form of human intervention that caused it. It was definitely this whole idea of an inside job just goes beyond reality, in a sense that it's so real now. And now that we have these allegations that the mafia were somehow in charge of the construction and maintenance of the steel structure itself, mafia crime families, they're only interested in making money, and that's it. There's a possibility there may be a connection between the mafia and the actual destruction of the World Trade Towers. It's like with the JFK assassination. The mafia was brought up, Cuba, Russia, and also inside job in the government, sort of like a Julius Caesar type thing. Here we are now, 2008. We're looking back at the World Trade Towers, the destruction. Now we say, they think the Jews pulled it. They think Al Qaeda pulled it, and now we're getting this idea that the mafia was somehow involved in the inside job. That would be a connection. That's just an assumption, but if you're a criminal organization, why not? Why not strike a deal?
I don't know. It makes me very sad to hear you say that. You know why? Because I don't think whether the building was reinforced with fireproofing on the steel, it would make any difference if it was penetrated by a missile. But I don't think a missile could turn the building into dust so that the volume that the building had when it was standing never hit the ground. That's not conventional controlled demolition. That's not the kind of thing that you can have planning on. And that's why some people, I don't know if it was you, had said, no, it was Hypnofan 35. He said he found it highly unlikely that they would use weapons so advanced that they hadn't been tested yet. And I was saying they hadn't been tested only because these are in the black programs. These are technologies that are so powerful, it's felt it would be far too dangerous for them to be released to the masses. And as a result, when inventors come along, those inventions are grabbed up. And this has gone as far back as Nikola Tesla. They said that when there was some problems in Manhattan with electricity at the time Nikola Tesla was alive, the police department would straight away go to his laboratory because they suspected him straight away. And he was working with lightning, and they called him the master of lightning. He had a real affinity to understand this type of energy. And he was considered a madman towards the end of his life, and yet there's a lot of mystery about him. And even it's claimed among those in the supposedly trying to advance free energy, they will call him such a genius that nobody can understand the papers. But I'm beginning to think that he wasn't such a genius. I mean, okay, maybe he blazed the territory, but that if you had free access to those papers, regular people could, who are trained, obviously you need to train them, they would be able to understand it. So that maybe the things he felt that his weaponry was so advanced that it would stop war, because once that technology was available to everybody, they would realize this is too serious.
I call it the ghost of Tesla.
It would stop war. So you wouldn't have this. I think please excuse me and let's keep staying connected on this, but the explanation about the Jews did it with Larry Silverstein and controlled demolition, that the Italians, the mafia did it because they didn't, they cheated on their contracts. And then there was a third person that was the scapegoat.
We said the
Al Qaeda, that the hijackers did it. All of those to me are not really resonating with the level of the technology that was buried and remains buried because of our racism to Arabs, to Jews, to Italians, and that our racism locks us and we can't connect with each other so that we can put pieces together and go, wow, maybe Nikola Tesla knew what he was talking about, but maybe we can't handle this power because we are so petty and we do have these prejudices against each other.
Yeah, well, the FBI, when, for example, when we had the anthrax scare, for example, the FBI was told to blame it on Al Qaeda, when in fact it was some guy who lived in America who was not Al Qaeda.
Well, actually, if you look into that more deeply, the strains of anthrax came out of a government laboratory somewhere in Tennessee, and they destroyed the strains, which was heartbreaking to real scientists, because they said you destroyed 10 years worth of work, so that they didn't want the evidence to go back to
well, they blamed everything on Al Qaeda. Anything that went wrong.
I know.
You know, FBI Director Robert Mueller, for example, he was the one who was making these connections that were ultimately unfounded to blame everything on Al Qaeda.
Right.
So it's all I know is, well, do you believe that a criminal organization of some kind brought the towers down?
I actually do believe it was an outside job, and I believe it goes more along with international drugs and weapons cartel, because
yes.
Black ops also means that you can have a very brisk, to say the least, and very lucrative business selling weapons that even members of our military may not be aware of.
Well, we sold weapons to Saddam Hussein, so the whole proliferation of weapons, and we have how many 50 nukes sitting in Italy, for example. I mean, we've got nuclear weapons all over the world.
Yeah, but what I'm proposing, John, is something even deeper than nuclear weapons. I'm saying that nuclear weapons are passé. And I'm saying as a result of not being sort of trained or educated or informed is the word. As a result of not being informed, we don't know how to look properly.
Well, we're being told lies, so it's anyone's guess now who was actually behind the destruction of the towers. It could have been multiple organizations, multiple racial groups.
I don't.
There is this. I mean, the mafia group is a terrorist group. The mafia is a terrorist.
Yeah, but they're not powerful.
No, they're not as powerful. But the fact that back in the '90s, the whole idea behind the whole fireproofing the columns, obviously it didn't work. And I've seen videos where they said that the fireproofing could be, you could just put your hand just gently on it and it would flake right off like toilet paper. So obviously the fireproofing was of a it was completely useless in terms of protecting what they said was supposed to protect the steel columns, because I have reason to think that the columns themselves, the steel, was of an inferior mix. So I think that's why they added the so-called fireproofing, because they think whoever built the towers knew they were cutting corners at some point. And of course, when you have a guy like, what's his first name? I know it's Silverstein. Is it Art Silverstein? I don't remember his first name.
Larry.
But Silverstein has been very controversial also in terms of the towers losing money. So I imagine there was a lot of corruption, multiple corruption. The World Trade Towers was an international center, financial center in and of itself. So there were multiple countries involved in and out of that building. So it seems plausible that what I would think it's just a very ugly scenario to think that we're never going to find out, and we're just going to be pointing fingers at groups and making allegations, because the more information that comes out, like today, there's just one little sentence here saying about, this guy was involved with the World Trade Tower, a dead mobster who was murdered, by the way, in the World Trade Towers.
Uh-huh.
He was murdered in the basement, and it was meant to be a kind of a message, sent a message, whatever kind of message it was. I just feel perplexed that it's just going to get uglier.
Well,
as time goes on, we're never going to really truly find out.
I think we can find out. I think just like if you're going to invest money in a project, you want to make sure the science is good, right? And a lot of venture capitalists, I mean, you've got a lot of people and they don't care what the project is. They'll just move with it, They just want to sell stock, and they say it's a risk, and it doesn't, like the producers, that film.
Yeah.
They didn't care what, most Broadway plays flop. They were counting on it flopping.
Right.
So taking that aside, if you were a serious investor, you want to make sure that what you're investing in is going to work, that there's a need for the product, that there's a market, that people have the ability to buy it.
Yeah.
All of these things you take into consideration. And I say you go about it like a scientist. So to me, with all due respect for your work and your intelligence, because clearly it's there, your sensitivity, your dedication, I think that you're blocked in not seeing that steel doesn't melt anyway, that you don't need to fireproof steel, and that fireproofing steel is in itself kind of I don't know what you say, kind of
well, there was a giant
sham.
hole in the towers.
No, but I'm just saying, my father's a contractor, and he used to bid jobs for the government, and he said it's a kind of an insider, kind of a cheating thing, where you bid low and you get the job, and even if you might lose on the bid, you make it up in the add-ons later on. And it sounds to me like fireproofing something that isn't flammable. Steel's not flammable.
Right.
Sounds like kind of a trick that contractors do. I hate to say it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, they were saying whatever hit the towers was so heavy that it started the destruction from the very top, and then it sort of mushroomed outward.
I know what I want to say. As far as being informed, there are people who have spent time on websites that are conducted by 40 big companies, and these websites have conventions where they try to solicit very serious investment from obviously very wealthy people. And they impress these investors with state-of-the-art technology. Now, my experience has been people who spend a lot of time on these websites who are not big-time investors, they become disconnected from the rest of society. They become horrified at what they start to discover. And I would like to show some of this to you, because I feel we've got enough of a foothold in media, and we've got our little kind of, internet and public access group, that perhaps we can sort of spread this knowledge out so that it's not as horrifying as it's been for those researchers who start to look at this. In other words, they start to see there are weapons that can dustify steel in a very short amount of time.
There's a story where it's like a ray that can control crowds.
Yes.
And it's a big, large, square-sized, look like a giant billboard, and it sends out a ray that can actually disperse people from a certain area. You can't actually stand in front of it, and it'll make you run away. And this is new tech. What this is called, like a ray beam, or a ray gun type thing. But like you see on Star Trek, they can put things on stun, or they can use it to kill. The whole idea of the death ray is not fantasy, and the death ray was invented by Tesla. That's why Tesla's the great mad scientist. And his papers are in the Pentagon. I mean, when he died, his black box of inventions is now under secret. It's top secret.
Well, let me put it this way, John. Do you think that the mafia owns Tesla technology?
No, I'm thinking that the mafia is just a small little kind of, like a footnote to the destruction of what was a corrupt building.
I just hate to see great intelligence distracted. So I will propose that.
I'm not saying that the mafia has the technology, but they're a criminal organization. They had to have had some inside knowledge into the destruction of the towers. I think if you were part of a mafia family, and your job is building buildings, at some point there's going to be a deal struck at some point.
I kind of can see what you say, but I think it's a very low level of thuggery. I think I agree with Nico Haupt's scenario that once you have access to the advanced technology, you don't need that many human beings in place. However, they thought they were doing a drill, and once they see the newspapers and the subsequent war on Afghanistan and so on, it would be too risky that they'd come forward. So,
well, I'm not reaching to any conclusions.
No, but
that's something I also told you was I would never come to a conclusion, say that the mafia pulled 9/11.
yeah, but you got to be careful about the seeds you plant, because people are prejudiced.
Oh, they can be prejudiced if they want.
And
if they have to get through that. That people have to get over their prejudice and their discriminations and racism. Just like you mentioned, they need to get away from that so they can look at things logically and observe and kind of have try to keep an open mind.
Yeah.
That there are multiple scenarios. Well, we're learning about multiple scenarios now. We have different scenarios now kind of slowly coagulating. And what I think is happening is we're seeing the ultimate corruption brought down the World Trade Towers. Now, you mentioned these, exotic weapons, secret weapons, which are very plausible ideas, and they're very intriguing ideas. And that's really what got me involved in becoming a no-planer, is because when you think about dustification of steel and the vaporization of glass, something hit those towers that caused them to fall, and to fall in the manner in which they did. It was complete. We were talking, and it's not just that, it fell beyond ground zero. I think it fell even lower than that. They went beyond, I think it was like 11, the towers themselves had 11 stories under it, underground. You could go 11 stories underground. That's how deep the towers were. And that destruction went all the way down to the very belly of their foundation. So that's complete destruction. And how can an airplane cause so much destruction? Even if it was just one airplane, how is it possible that the other buildings around it, like Building 7, for example, could fall? And you have our Steelstein clearly saying pull it, and then he retracts his statement that it was taken out of context. So right there, it opens a can of worms. It's like, what do you mean pull it? You go on Charlie Rose and you say, okay, pull it. That's what he said. Did they even see the clip on YouTube? And then to retract that statement, and that there was not a controlled demolition of Building 7, then people can stop and think and say, what the hell is going on? What's going on at Ground Zero? Silverstein, of all the buildings that went down on 9/11, after the Twin Towers and Tower 7 came down, Silverstein pulled other buildings of his. He pulled all his buildings in the vicinity of Ground Zero, except for the buildings he didn't own, which I believe was the Deutsche Bank. There's a couple other buildings that they're still sort of like decaying.
Now, what does that tell you about the buildings that are decaying?
Well, whoever owns the Deutsche Bank, the one that's
but what I'm saying is, please, just bear with me.
Yes.
It's so boring. But when you start saying something like Deutsche Bank is still decaying, that is so interesting. You go, why is that happening? And
it's still standing. And meanwhile, Silverstein literally, the whole controlled demolition also theory came about because he did controlled demolize his other buildings, the smaller ones that were around Ground Zero, except for the ones he did not own. Those buildings are still standing.
I don't think he owns anything. I think he's a straw man. And the sad thing is you take one guy that might have morals to do such a thing, to take such a job, and it casts aspersions on Jewish people.
Exactly. Well, that's where the whole idea. That's where Alex Jones kind of steps in with his very loud, bullhorn, saying that the Mossad's pulled 9/11. And
I know.
Anybody who's listening can put him on right now. Eventually, he's going to say it because that's his favorite line.
Yeah.
So they blame the Jews for 9/11. They blame the Arabs for 9/11, and we're blaming our own government for 9/11.
And you're blaming Italians.
Now we've got Italians are now slowly. This is a developing story, though. So I'm just in the dark as much as everybody. But this is something I'm definitely going to look into.
But let me continue with that consideration of private contractors who thought they were doing a drill, who had access in black operations to understanding how to, that was their job. Their job was to use the technology that many people in the military don't even know about. That's how black it is.
Oh, you mentioned something.
So, no, let me finish. It's very important that I finish. Okay, so these people do the job that they think is just a drill, right? Because everybody only knows a little section. They know this section, information given on a need-to-know basis only. And there's not this comprehensive viewpoint that Harold Channer's always talking about, which is so essential by being so tunnel vision and so compartmentalized. However, the comprehensive viewpoint would have emerged if they saw Afghanistan, if they saw the media, if they saw the TV fakery layering into it, and so on. So these people had to be killed. Now, maybe you can hire a mafia type of guy, a hitman to go and do that. But to me, that's about the extent of the mafia's participation. Now, this shows how dangerous the people are who know that such a thing couldn't happen, and they continue on. And that's why I'm saying you've got a Stephen Jones who was directly instrumental in stopping the Pons-Fleischmann cold fusion. This, to me, is a far greater, I hate to use the word criminal because everybody gets all reactive about it, but the people who actually did 9/11 could have been doing it in a black operation where they were actually innocent of what they were doing, and then later on were killed because maybe they couldn't live with themselves and they would have been a whistleblower and stepped forward or whatever. So to me, what's most exciting about the kind of work that we were doing, and then you and Victor connecting over the labels, is can we pull together the great intelligence that exists in our country, not to endlessly spin around and say, we'll never know, but bring those elements together who do know, come together and reemerge as a society that is worth emulating. With great pride we say, we have this constitution, we have a democracy, we have participation of all. And then with that bright shining example, we can go out to the rest of the world and have democracy embraced because we're actually practicing it. But it depends on correct information. It depends on moving forward without shame, without saying, I can never understand Nikola Tesla, I can never understand Einstein, I can never figure this out. I think, what's the use of an education? Why do we even bother if we can't understand the power?
Well, if we're dealing with secret weaponry, then it's secret, right?
But it shouldn't be secret.
We have to break that secret. We have to open that box.
And I think it's by breaking open the prejudices we have and the racism we have. I think that releases something.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, because when you mention the 9/11 truth movements, yes, they are fractured, and they all have they blame different groups, different racial groups, religious groups.
Yeah, and I have to admit,
what got me, that's why I got frustrated with the Alex Jones crowd, because it just becomes nauseating after a while, because it's like they believe it and they indoctrinate these young children into this belief system, which is a form of pedophilia.
When I was watching Web Fairy and that video that was taken down, you could see people really thinking she was doing the wrong thing, but as they were articulating whatever it was, she was answering back, and you could see light bulbs opening up. They were learning. So I don't want to put anybody in a group, including an Alex Jones group, and I don't think they're necessarily children, although they are a younger crowd. But if you're not actively participating in getting better information to them, how can you blame them? For
we can also blame the Aryan Nation as well. I mean, they claim now the Aryans are going around. They've been touting the controlled them. They actually they took that ball and ran with it in 2004. I mean, there are a lot of Aryan Nation online websites that really postulated the no plane theory originally, and their membership grew big time. But what I wanted to tell you about the Aryans is that they're now claiming that they are the original Israelites. This is a fact. They now claim that they are the ancient Israelites and that Hitler was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. But what's interesting to me is that Aryans have always wanted to subvert Jews anyway. So here they are adopting now, claiming that they are Jews, in a sense, and that they are the original Israelites.
Do you know how complex this Aryan stuff is? That everybody's assuming, even among in many circles in India, still, that you had the whiter crowds coming from the north, bringing the Vedas and the high culture into the darker south. Whereas when you actually take a look at it, when you actually go to the temples and the monuments and really pay attention, and this is something that's about as dangerous as the no planes theory.
Oh yeah, very dangerous.
But do you realize that my investigation in India, top to bottom, is that the great architectural monuments are more similar to ancient Egypt than they are to the relatively new stuff, the Taj Mahal and so on, which is the Mughal architecture in the north, which means that the great wisdom, again, as evidenced by the ability to heal, that the arts, the greatest thing about education and civilization is that you can heal people, you can uplift people. So the real firepower seems to be in the south, in the darker races.
You mean the Middle East?
No, in India.
In India,
in the south of India, they are so black they are blue. They're blue-black in parts.
Like Ethiopia.
And there's so much prejudice again going, which is very sad, that this is not quite understood. But this is why I want to take a group to India, maybe in January when the weather is cooler, because it gets very hot in the south, and actually just show people those monuments. Take them to temples that are so massive. An elephant looks very appropriate, in the Holy of Holies, in the center part.
So do you think that some of the monuments in the north are somehow subversive to the south of India? Do you think that's the monuments to proclaim their dominion?
Yeah, I think this word Aryan is not understood. Neither is Judaism, and Islam is Islam. Let's bring up Islam. When you start studying some of the older saints, say of the 16th century and maybe the 11th century, going to some of the tombs where they're buried,
yes,
you begin to see that Sufism is older even than Muhammad, and that a lot of what you would think of as Islam is really from something more ancient. And probably for political expediency, they decided to sort of line themselves up with Islam. But say you go to Nizamuddin and his burial place in Delhi, and there's like energy flying off that tomb big time. This guy, this saint, never went to Mecca. And this is something that becomes a political embarrassment later on. And I think he did some fancy dancing in his lifetime to get around that fact, because maybe the rulers that were coming in at that time wanted that to be, the party line. Just as today, I'm going to be doing a show with Carl Pearson, who's going to show that Howard Stern was probably kicked off of Clear Channels because he was coming out against the war in Iraq. And that what was happening, it looked like the FCC, which you would think would be a neutral party, were starting to be controlled by this religious right.
Yeah,
highly dangerous.
They've been handing down a lot of fines. I mean, just for like nothing. Whether somebody slips a four-letter word, or the famous scene of Janet Jackson losing her top.
Right.
Super Bowl. I mean, it's definitely a movement. I call it fascism. There's definitely a fascistic element, strain in the culture.
Well, as I'm going over my charity, which is 12 years old, I'm very careful, because it was pointed out by somebody that at St. Mark's they were saying, donate to us, and it's a tax write-off. But in truth, 501c3s cannot have any political affiliations. So St. Mark's Church has to stay spiritual, religious.
Yeah, they have to.
And
Unitarian.
so I'm very careful when I have anything to do with the ballot initiative that any donations do not go to the Concordia Foundation. But I got to thinking, it's kind of becoming kind of mushy in people's awareness because there is now so much crossing of church and state precisely because of this religious right starting to have this effect on the FCC. And I'm going to spell it out much more clearly with Carl today when I do a show with him, because he wrote up an amicus brief and submitted it to the FCC, and he could see that they had to struggle to answer him back. It's going to be really interesting. So when I post this show, I'll connect it to that.
Yeah.
Any chance you can come up and join us today in an hour?
What time? I mean, exactly what time?
2 o'clock we're going to start filming. 2:30, by 2:30.
You'll be there from 2 to 2:30 filming?
I'm going to be there from 2 until 6, setting up, and then I'm going to do shows with Carl later on. But it'd be great to have you aboard if you wanted to join us.
Oh, you mean to sit down sort of thing? Or
Yeah.
I'm not exactly, what are you...
Either be in the audience, be in the control room. I always like to take comments even from the control room, to make it very interactive.
Okay, what room are you going to be in?
A closed studio.
Okay, and you'll be there at 2?
Yeah, I'll be there at 2. Actually, I'm going to pack it up right now. If there's any other calls, I'll check my email. Yesterday I wasn't streaming out, but I could see by the robust feedback that today it's working.
Yes, and you're coming in very loud and clear too.
Yeah, that's
no
great.
glitching.
But what I usually do is...
Paul, I just wanted to say, you said something really fascinating earlier. You mentioned about, on Larry King, there were all these military officials on Larry King talking about military bases with nuclear warheads and stuff were shut down mysteriously. And it happened across the country. It happened in Russia, and it happened in a couple other countries where missile defense areas completely went down, they went off the computer like someone had pulled the plug. And then they would miraculously turn back on, and they said that they weren't sure why this was happening, but they were assuming that they were some kind of I'm going to say it, UFO. That doesn't mean a UFO from outer space, but they think that some kind of technology has been flying over military bases and shutting them off, shutting them down.
Right, right.
And this was on Larry King about 2 weeks ago, and I was like, this is fascinating, because this is another reason why I started thinking about no-plane theory, because I said, this whole idea that I'm hearing from Paula Gloria and from Rosalie Grable about this secret weaponry going on, and we're seeing it. We're actually seeing it happen. It's actually taking place, and it's taking place in our military bases.
What's interesting when you go into the advanced technologies, the ether-based and so on, it seems there is a connection between the physical and consciousness, and that when you take consciousness into account, you can start to understand the source of this power. However, if you understand this from a lower level, it starts to look really woo-woo, way out there, and people don't have a slot for it. So I think there's a danger that if you're not very careful and methodical, and sometimes you need to compartmentalize your studies. Sometimes you have to say UFOs here, World Trade Center there, advanced technology, and be sure that you're looking at the evidence. Like, in other words, if they're coming over military installations and shutting them down, what is the technology? It may actually be technology that regular human beings have, but they're pretending that it's UFOs.
Oh yeah, like the guy just pulls the plug, like in the movie Airplane too. He goes, "I'm only kidding." I don't know if you remember that film. But no. He does that. The guy pulls the plug and the whole place goes black. But really, I mean, they actually showed footage of a white orb that was flying over a military base during a blackout.
Right.
Yes, I think we have moved into the era of exotic weaponry and secret weapons, death rays. Wow, they found water on Mars. I mean, in our lifetime, we're gonna see astronauts on Mars. You know what they found on Mars? They found they found what they think is rocket debris, rocket fuel. That did not come from the rover.
Right.
So that's another interesting aspect.
No, these are all these are deep topics. If anybody wants to comment and you're shy to phone, You can email me at rabbitholecentral@earthlink.net. And I'd just like to take this occasion to mention that Total Penetration is going to be next Monday at 7:30. That's the 11th of August. And again, for those people who are shy, I'm going to take email responses at totalpenetration@earthlink.net. So you can connect with me that way. So today...
I think you might have a call.
Okay, hang on just a second.
Yeah.
Rabbit Hole Central?
Yeah, is this the famous Paula G?
Yes. Yes.
Hello, superstar. How you doing?
Good, good. I have about 5 more minutes till I close the stream. What's up, Ugly George?
Well, I heard that you're going to be over there with your good friend Carl Pearson,
Uh-huh.
and that maybe I should drop in for a few minutes. It's really your show and his show.
No, that would be really nice. That would be really nice because at about 3:30 we're going to start, and I have it until 6. So maybe we could do some round table thing. I'm trying to get John Galino to join us also.
Okay,
So
fine.
let's give that a shot.
All right. That would make it an all superstar convention, okay?
Okay, great.
So once again, the Paula Gloria show triumphs in the ratings.
Yeah, we got some nice stuff up. 9/11 Shaman and Ugly George at brunch in Gramercy Park looks like it's a real hit.
Oh my God!
And
Probably the biggest show of the decade.
Yeah, so that's good. Hang on just 1 second. John, do you have anything to say?
I didn't hear anything.
Oh, you can't. Oh, you go because you've got the stream shut. Ugly George was just saying he's going to join us up at M&N.
Awesome. I love Ugly George.
Yeah, so let's turn it into a kind of a round table, at least one of the shows, particularly when we talk about the FCC and Howard Stern. I think that would be really fun.
Yes, that'd be a lot. Yeah, I'm gonna also I'll take down. I'm gonna Xerox some stuff.
Okay.
I'm gonna print out some stuff we can talk about.
Okay, great. So
I'll see you too.
Okay, bye. George?
Yes.
You still there? When I go back and forth, you can't hear each other. But he said he's going to come up there, and what we're going to do is go over an amicus brief that Carl Pearson made on behalf of Howard Stern. And I think you're going to be very interested because it corroborates a lot of the things that you've been talking about.
Corroborates. Wow.
Yeah.
Big words. Okay. I hope your viewers are smart enough to understand corroborates.
Well, in other words, your experience and Howard Stern's experience seems to be the same, and lawyers can figure it out. Now, it looks like the FCC started to be in the hands of some special interests. It has to do with church and state not being quite as separate as we'd like to.
Yes, I've heard that before.
And charities.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and charities, as you know, I'm really looking into this carefully because I want to make sure that the Concordia Foundation is absolutely perfect and correct. 501c3s can have nothing to do with politics. So any time I promote the ballot initiative, I want to make sure that no donations go to the Concordia Foundation, but rather to whatever Carl and the people set up, and that we have a nice steering committee at St. Mark's Church. I know that's not your thing, George, but that's what's going on with Concordia.
Okay, well, I'll see you over there about 3:30.
Okay, great.
Do another hit, high-rated show.
Okay.
Win some Emmys for Paula Gloria, Ugly George, and everybody, okay?
Okay, great.
All right, see you
Thanks,
then.
George. Okay, bye. So that's it. This has been a really fun stream, and I'm going to be checking out now. So somebody said it's up, but they didn't have anything to say, and we got the calls we needed. Thanks. Bye.